Good evening. With President Putin never far from the front line of media attention, this week the countries of the CSTO, the Collective Security Treaty Organization, have been meeting in Kazakhstan's capital Astana to enhance alliances and foreign policy coordination between 6 member states, including Russia. Well, joining me to discuss the key insights and implications of the event are our very own Anastasiya, Lavrina and Orkhan Amashov. But first, our Kazakhstan reporter Fariza Kalamazina reports now with the latest from Astana.
At the Astana summit, leaders of the Collective Security Treaty Organization signed 14 documents, including a draft declaration addressing the evolving international military and political landscape. According to the organization's Secretary General, the declaration outlines the organization's position on key global security challenges and sets ahead the approaches of its member states to international cooperation. One of the key decisions was the approval of a targeted interstate program to strengthen the Tajik-Afghan border. In addition, agreements were made to enhance military cooperation and amendments were introduced to cooperation in transportation, military formations, movable property and military products. Another significant document was an agreement to following strengthen allied relations with the organization. Earlier this year, Armenia suspended its membership in the organization, citing what Yerevan referred to as the failure of the CSTO to address its security challenges. As a result, Prime Minister Nikol Pashinyan didn't attend the summit, although he had agreed to sign the final documents in comments to Russian media. President Vladimir Putin noted that Armenia had taken a break from participation but could resume full-scale cooperation in the near future. He also added that Armenia's decision was driven by its internal political situation. The Secretary General of the organization, Imamgali Tasmagambetov, also commented on the situation, saying that no state or organization can influence Yerevan's decision, and he is confident that Armenia will fully participate in the future. What was discussed behind closed doors during the summit remains confidential. However, Kazakh President Kassym-Jomart Tokayev briefly said that the president's enhanced views on current issues of international and regional security and also reviewed the main outcomes of the CSTO's activities during Kazakhstan's chairmanship this year. This was Fariza Kalamazina from Almaty, AnewZ.
Well, let's just remind ourselves of some of the background to this alliance. The CSTO was formed in 2002 and is comprised of 6 countries: Russia, Kazakhstan, Belarus, Armenia, Kyrgyzstan and Tajikistan. At this week's summit in Astana, Armenia was the only country not to attend. Well, in response to Armenia's absence, Russian Foreign Ministry spokeswoman Maria Zakharova said, "We hope that for the sake of future security of a friendly country and the entire region in general, our partnership with Armenia within the CSTO framework will fully resume. We confirm that at this point doors are open for Yerevan's return to full-fledged cooperation in the CSTO." Now, we heard Orkhan there in Fariza's report some of the reasons given for Armenia's non-attendance. Just talk us through some of the background to this.
Armenia stopped attending CSTO meetings, I think, back in September 2023. And when it comes to the wider landscape of Russian-Armenian relations and relations between Armenia and CSTO, which is Collective Security Treaty Organization dominated by Russia, I think the root cause of the problem goes back to 2020, when the war took place here in this region between Azerbaijan and Armenia. As a trusted ally of Russia, Armenia was reliant on Russian support. We know that, in particular in the context of its confrontation with Azerbaijan, we know that the certain portion of Azerbaijani territory, Karabakh region, was under Armenian control, and that was illegal control in line with international law. It was illegal occupation. And this illegal occupation was supported by Russia because Armenia and Russia were trusted allies. So we had what we may call, in many ways, Russian-sponsored Armenian occupation of Azerbaijani lands. That was in many ways, the reality of the situation back then. And during the war of 2020, Armenia had some expectations that Russia would interfere, would be on the side of Armenia. But the Russian government exercised a principle of realpolitik, because Azerbaijan was working very hard during that particular stage, trying to ensure that any third-party involvement will be curbed, and Turkish factor played an important role in this process, of course. And the Russian argument eventually was that it's Azerbaijani territory, and Article 4 of the CSTO, Collective Security Treaty Organization, wouldn't apply because the confrontation, military confrontation, was taking place in Azerbaijani territory. And Azerbaijan, not being member of the CSTO, there was absolutely no reason for them to interfere as CSTO, as this organization. And Armenia was disgruntled, of course, they had some expectations. And this same spirit followed throughout the next 2-3 years. There was one very quite massive, actually, flare-up back in September 2022 between Azerbaijan and Armenia on the conditional state border, and then Armenia was expecting Russia to interfere, and CSTO to interfere, and their argument coming from CSTO was based on the idea that the border is conditional, it's not delimited, therefore there's no ground for intervention. And again, when Azerbaijan resumed its full control over Karabakh region, then again Armenia had some expectations that those Russian peacekeepers who were stationed there would interfere. So really it goes back to 2020 and the developments that followed subsequently. Armenia is claiming that there's no value being part of the Russia-dominated Collective Security Treaty Organization. But Russian-Armenian relations bilaterally are still thriving. We know that there is a massive military base located in Armenia, and certain sections of Armenian-Turkish border is controlled by Russians, and the same applies to Iranian-Armenian border. So behind the facade of visibly deteriorating Armenian-Russian relations, there is actually quite a strong element of cooperation. What Pashinyan said very recently, I'm coming back to this subject, CSTO, he said that CSTO is a security, existential threat to Armenia, and their relations have reached points of no return. But in reality, I think what Armenia will need to do at some point in the fullness of time. That's what European partners of Armenia are expecting from Armenia, that they should take a drastic action and leave CSTO. They talked a lot about leaving this organization. They said that they earlier said that they did freeze their cooperation with CSTO, but still, as we heard from our Almaty correspondent, Prime Minister Nikol Pashinyan agreed to all the documents adopted within the framework of CSTO. For Armenia at this juncture, it's absolutely vital to increase support that they're getting from Western countries. And in order to get that support, to increase the scope of that support, certain actions taken in connection with CSTO, rhetoric-wise actions, are actually quite useful. So not being there would mean that they're actually moving in the direction of Europe. But the reality is that cooperation between Russia and Armenia is still thriving, and in particular in the economic sphere, because we know that Armenia is heavily involved in circumvention of sanctions levied against Russia.
Anastasiya, Orkhan there mentioned the direction of Europe. Let's just look in the other direction for a second and look to China. Obviously, there is a geographic border between CSTO countries and China, and the intricacies of those military alliances really sort of loom large when you consider how important that the presence of China is in that part of the world.
We can see that China, of course, has its own interest in Central Asia, and it's not a big secret. When the confrontation started between Russia and Ukraine, many experts were predicting about the behavior of China, whether China somehow is planning to be involved in that conflict, openly support Russia or not. But we could see that China took a quite neutral position, expressing the willingness to see the peaceful resolution of the conflict, but at the same time not supporting neither Russia nor Western alliance, especially the United States of America. And in Central Asia, we can see that China has its own economic interests and willing to increase its economic presence there. Middle corridor for the future, One Belt, One Road, Belt initiative, which is quite important for China. That's the key priorities. When it comes to security and military cooperation, it's more for CSTO, and China also understand and support it. Despite the fact that the cooperation among some countries continue within the Shanghai Cooperation Organization, at the same time, this is not a military alliance, and that cooperation has a frames of economic cooperation, transport partnership, transport energy partnership among the countries within any kind of projects, and of course security and stability. And if we just look back to the history, we can remember it happened in 2022 when the president of China called to president of Russia, Vladimir Putin, saying that China relies on Russia and CSTO in particular in the questions related to security and a partnership within CSTO in the region, including Central Asia. So for China, it's very important to sustain the peace in the region and security cooperation, at the same time not being directly involved in all of these military alliances. Therefore, I don't think that Russia, China may see any, let's say, confrontations in the future or disagreements when it comes to the security issues in the region, in the cooperation between the countries. But at the same time, I'm more than sure that China will have a very serious concern if any of the countries will face some troubles, security issues, troubles, as it happens now in Tajikistan on the border with Afghanistan. This is also very important for China. But again, China will take it on the agenda, keep it on the agenda, these issues, without any direct confrontation with Russia or with any other countries when it comes to security issues and matters.
And it's a part of the world that attracts attention from other global powers too. And we know recently that France in particular has been very interested in Kazakhstan.
Yes, what's interesting, all Central Asia countries, despite the fact that they're members of CSTO, have quite independent policy. With some Western countries, United States of America and France and Germany, it doesn't matter if Russia has some confrontation with them or not. Also, we shouldn't forget about Turkic countries alliance, Organization of Turkic States, where Kazakhstan is also among the leading countries. So yes, we should see how France and some other European countries will continue to make attempt to increase their influence in the region. But when it comes to security issues, when it comes to cooperation among the member states, when it comes to the military alliances, of course, CSTO member states will try to have a united position, one position to deal with all of those global and regional security issues which is on the agenda. What's quite interesting for me is the final document adopted at this summit in Astana, Kazakhstan. There was nothing mentioned about Ukraine. We could see how the countries are still willing, of course, they support the peaceful negotiations to start and happen between Russia and Ukraine, but they're not willing to be a part of this confrontation, a part of this war. They mostly care about the security issues related to the region itself, to the Central Asia, to the CSTO member states. Of course, Armenia is also one of the concerns, whether these countries can come back to the alliance after some time, now Armenia suspended its participation, but it can be resumed, as it was mentioned. And I can understand how member states of the CSTO are willing to see it, because the presence of Western influence in Armenia is also growing. We see how France, for example, is sending some military equipment to Armenia, how the United States is willing to have more close cooperation with Armenian government in some particular issues in relation to Russian-Ukraine war or toward the situation in the South Caucasus. And I can understand how member states of Central Asia are not willing to see increased presence, especially military presence, of Western powers in the region. Therefore, the return of Armenia to the alliance is quite welcomed, not only by Russia, but also by other participants. When and how it happens, it's quite complicated to answer right now. But I can think that the member states of the CSTO will, of course, continue having its independent position and cooperation with some Western powers, even if the confrontation between those countries and Russia will be increased after some time.
And Orkhan, Anastasiya mentioned the United States there, another huge global power with a lot of interest in the region and a sense of strategic rivalry with other countries like France playing out amongst this group of nations.
Yes, indeed, yeah. Particularly, it's very, very clearly visible within the confines of Central Asia. Within Central Asian countries, they have this format called Central Asia Plus. This format is not just applicable to their relations with the United States or with the European Union. It's a general format. Central Asia does, as a region, is acutely conscious of the fact that they are in the battlefield area wherein China and United States are engaged in tug of war, effectively. Last time, actually, during our last conversation, I talked about the reincarnation of Great War, which was back in 19th century. And now it's between China and United States. The reality of the situation there is that Russia is still a power to be reckoned with in Central Asia. And I think Vladimir Putin's latest trip to Astana is a very clear example of that influence. This influence, in many ways, is in the process of retrenchment. Because if we compare early 90s, when the Soviet Union was still in existence, this territory was under Soviet control. It was effectively part of Greater Russia, if we may use this term in this context. But now Central Asian countries are pursuing very independent foreign policy. They do not want to be under Russian or Chinese or American influence. They want to augment their regional autonomy. But in the large landscape of Central Asia, we see the competition between US and China. We see it in the context of Middle Corridor, as to which we referred earlier. We know that Azerbaijan is particularly interested in this project, and earlier I think there was a construct which was mentioned about China plus Central Asia plus Azerbaijan. And this goes to the root of this Middle Corridor project, connecting China with Europe via Central Asia and Azerbaijan, which is a vital ingredient in this chain. Chinese influence is growing, and America is not very happy about it. China trade turnover between 5 Central Asian countries and China back in 2023 was $90 billion US. Back in 2022, it was $70 billion US. So you see this incremental increase of Chinese influence in Central Asia. Corresponding figure related to Central Asia and Russia is about, I think, is about $45 billion US. So this will change in favor of China. What will be the American position regarding this? America is going to recalibrate, and they need to offer new technology to Central Asian countries in those areas where China has not offered anything tangible. And in particular, when we were attending COP29, we talked about Chinese influence in green technology. And with the US withdrawal or the reduction in their clout in climate diplomacy, China is about to offer green technology to those countries who want to transition from fossil fuels to green technology, and that's going to be through Chinese green technology. So for Central Asian countries is to maintain their autonomy, and I think within the grand scheme of things, Chinese influence will increase to the detriment of Russia in the fullness of time, and there will be a long-term competition with US, which will probably ultimately end in a construct of competitive cooperation between them.
Orkhan, one country we've not focused on yet is Tajikistan. Tell us about bring us up to speed about what's going on there on the border with Afghanistan.
Yeah, that's a very interesting subject, particularly relevant in the context of CSTO. We know that Russian, I think, National Security Secretary, Anastasiya may correct me if I gave his designation in a wrong way, as Sergei Shoigu was in Afghanistan very recently. Afghanistan is in a very interesting state now. Its government administration is not officially recognized by the United Nations. According to international law, current administration is considered controlling party, but not official government. And there's a question of legitimacy and recognition. Following the US withdrawal from Afghanistan, Russia wants to increase its influence, and that's what they have been doing for the past few years. And there is a problem on the Tajik-Afghan border, because that border is considered CSTO border, and that must be properly maintained. And I think the CSTO recently appointed a new person there. And therefore, I think that CSTO and in particular Russia will increase its influence in Afghanistan, and the security of that border will be a matter of supreme criticality for them for the months and years to come.
So, Anastasiya, with so many variables at play as we've discussed tonight, give us your sense of the future of the CSTO.
Well, as it was confirmed by all member states of this organization, they are willing to continue their partnership and cooperation. The countries may have different positions on some global issues, on the situation around Russia-Ukraine war and the situation in the Middle East. But when it comes to security, they intend to have more, let's say, a withable one-side approach to this situation in order to be able to deal with all challenges and security issues if there happens anything. We could see how CSTO also studies the existing of using, testing and developing prospects to all modern weapons. That's why the presence of Russian President Vladimir Putin, it was quite important for all of them. We know about new missile system used by Russia, how it was used, what are on the table and how it planned to be used in the future. It was quite significant information for all of those who attended the summit in Astana, Kazakhstan. So regional and global security issues, what are the future expectations? And of course, how exactly the countries are willing to balance their foreign and domestic issues. Coming back to what my colleagues just mentioned, the situation on the border between Tajikistan and Afghanistan, it's also quite painful for everybody, for all member states, as Tajikistan, it's, let's say, being considered as a gate to Central Asia, and how the situation will be developed then. It's quite important. We all remember what happened in Kazakhstan in 2022, if I'm not mistaken.
You mean the January 2023?
Right, and the 2023, right, and how the reaction of the CSTO was there. It was quite, let's say, timely, and it was appreciated by all member states. So this time they want to be ready if something happened. The countries don't need any kind of intervention. They don't need any urgent meeting to happen immediately. Tajikistan should be ready to respond if there is anything happen, and the strong border is number one issue to be on the agenda and to be discussed. I cannot exclude that at the next meeting probably there will be more detailed explanation what has been achieved by Tajikistan in this particular issue. And again, if I'm not mistaken, now the presidency is in Kazakhstan, and the next in 2025 it will be transferred to Kyrgyzstan. That's also one important issue, what was on the agenda, how it's happened, and how Kyrgyzstan is ready to deal with all of those global and regional issues. Therefore, of course, we can expect the countries to continue express their one-side approach, as I already mentioned, to the global issues and regional agenda when it comes to security. And everybody is still thinking about the behavior of Armenia, as I mentioned before, whether this country is willing to be part of this family. If not, Armenia is still a part of this family. It doesn't matter if it's suspended its participation or not. And the increased presence of power and influence of some Western countries in Armenia is worried issues for all member states of the CSTO, especially for Russia. So it will be considered, it will be discussed in the future, but as for now, the country is willing to concentrate on what is happening in the region only.
Well, thank you both, as always, for your analysis, and thank you for watching. That's all we've got time for on this hour, and we wish you a very pleasant evening ahead.